So let's welcome Rebecca Lewis and our panel here to talk about From Surviving to Thriving, Innovative Housing Solutions for Fire Recovery Zones. Rebecca Lewis is an associate professor in planning, public policy and management at the University of Oregon, and the director of the Institute of Policy Research and Engagement. She studies land use policy, transportation finance, and the nexus of land use, transportation, housing, and climate change. Very straightforward, black and white challenges. You have all the answers to, we know. Rebecca, thank you for joining us, and take it away.
Thanks, Steve. So I'm going to stand up here. I think we're going to swap off at the podium. So it's my honor to introduce you to our speakers today. My research focuses a lot on the land use and regulatory barriers to housing. So this topic is of great interest to me. And I worked with Matt McRae, and this effort was led by Melissa Graciosa, which within IPRE on the McKenzie Housing Recovery Plan. So I'm familiar with some of the challenges that we faced in rebuilding homes post-fire. And I'm glad that we're going to hear these innovative examples and really, focus in on some of the successes that we've had in rebuilding. We're all aware that our state faced a housing crisis before the wildfires, and that the fires exacerbated affordable housing crisis in the state. We've heard throughout the day about challenges in recovery for households, particularly vulnerable households. So I want to preface with some data, and thank you to Michael Mortar for putting this panel together and helping me track down some data. We've heard some of this throughout the day as well. This is a really difficult question to answer, and that's something that we struggled with in the McKenzie Housing Recovery Plan. How many homes were lost? How many of those were primary residences? All these other sorts of questions that make these really difficult to answer. So we have data, or I have data via Michael from Lane County, Marion and Len, and Jackson County. Lane County, 517 homes lost, 167 have been replaced. Marion County, 724 homes lost. Of those, 258 have been replaced. Jackson County is really the gold standard in terms of data, because they go into depth about individual types of structures and primary versus secondary and all these other sorts of things. So 612 primary residential structures, there are 147 that are not yet recovered, 143 multifamily, 17 not yet permitted or recovered, 1,500 manufactured, and about 700 not yet recovered. So again, we know that there's this need, and these are some really interesting, innovative solutions that we're going to hear about. The other thing I wanted to note is that as part of the McKenzie Housing Recovery Plan, we measured at this current rate of recovery, how long is it going to take to rebuild? And we've only done this sort of metric for Lane County, but it will take 10 years to rebuild at our current rate. So we have this huge gap, this huge lag. And so hearing from these innovative solutions will be really beneficial for us. So without any further delay, I wanted to introduce our two panelists, and I will turn it over to them. So Brandi, I believe, will be going first. And Brandi is a third-generation McKenzie resident who worked for Conservation Land Trust and McKenzie River Trust for 14 years. After the Holiday Farm Fire of 2020 burned 173,000 acres and 500 homes, Brandi worked and volunteered alongside fire-affected community members and watershed partners to help replant and rebuild a more resilient watershed and community. She's a founding board member for a new nonprofit stood up by McKenzie neighbors and stakeholders to rebuild a thriving, diverse, and more resilient McKenzie community. Our second speaker will be Peter Hainley. Peter has been with CASA of Oregon since 1992 and its executive director since 1997. Prior to joining CASA, he spent a couple years in the Peace Corps in the Dominican Republic. He serves or has served on boards of National Community Reinvestment Coalition, Network for Oregon Affordable Housing, Community Housing Fund, Natural Rural Housing Coalition, and the National Farm Worker Housing Directors Association. So thank you, and I'll now pass it over to Brandi.
Can you hear me? Yes, yes. Thank you. Well, wanted to, first of all, thank everybody for hanging in there. Last panel of the day. It's been an amazing day, lots of information, and it's beautiful outside. So the fact that this room is still full, I'm grateful that you wanted to hear about creative solutions to affordable housing after a disaster. So McKenzie Community Land Trust, we are a brand new nonprofit, stood up after the Holiday Farm fire. And actually our board has been working on this organization for over a year. We were actually founded, November of 22. And I look forward to sharing our journey and how we got where we are. And part of that was having the opportunity to listen to other fire-impacted communities in Washington, as well as having the opportunity to go to the After the Fire conference in Northern California the last 2 years and listen to our neighboring state, California, who is way ahead of us in these mega fires. I didn't even know that was a word till I went to Sonoma for this conference a couple of years ago. And how, you know, a lot of this recovery stuff, we can look to our neighbors. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. Each community need is unique, but there's a lot of similarities at the same time. So I'm hoping today we have the opportunity to plant some seeds, like other communities helped plant seeds with us on how we can move forward in recovery. Okay. Oh, I went the wrong way. Okay, that's not helpful. There we go. Okay, so just stepping up. It's going to happen. It is. There we go. Just stepping back to where I come from. I do not live in the fire footprint. I live downstream on the McKenzie. The Holiday Farm fire burned over 173,000 acres, a 25-mile corridor of the McKenzie Valley. It's a very long river community, 10 little villages as you head outside of Springfield on upriver. And I'm third generation McKenzie, but I like to make it clear that I did not experience, I was not living and impacted by the fire directly. My grandparents moved to Blue River in '46, and Blue River is a lot of what I'll be talking about today. But I want to mention that. And then this quote, not an expert, I just have experience, is actually not my quote. I heard that in like a week or two after our fire, listening to a community leader from Paradise and sharing their story. And that was the first thing that she said is, I am not an expert, I just have experience. And it's like, just really just hit home for me. It's like, I think everybody in this room, right? We're all learning. Disaster is new to Oregon. I've always felt we lived in the Goldilocks zone here. We don't anymore. So here we are working together to move forward. I'm gonna do this, there we go. So I mentioned 173,000 acres burned in the Holiday Farm fire. This is an image of a portion of that. McKenzie River running through our communities. And we lost over 500 homes, 517 homes exactly. And this small town that had existed for over 100 years, the town of Blue River, was gone overnight. And we have some of our community members right here in this room that I shared. It's like, okay, I'm up here telling the stories and offering the numbers, and you let me know if I missed something, because I feel honored to have the opportunity to be trusted to share these stories. So Blue River originally was a mining town, turn of the century, then a timber town, dam building town. It was thriving in the 60s, and you know, it was this wonderful community. And then even before the fire, because of timber, you know, the town was not thriving, and actually couldn't even drink from its drinking water system on occasion pre-fire. So we talk about sometimes with disaster comes opportunity. None of us would have wished what happened. Here we are. It's like, okay, how do we move forward in building a more resilient community for the folks that lived there when the fire happened, but also the next generations of people ahead. This is another image of, you can see the Holiday Farm fire devastation from the schoolyard, which was that historic school was saved by the firefighters, actually was a conscious choice, so I'm told, by the firefighters to save the school because that is the core of the McKenzie River Valley, K through 12, and you know, it's most of the valley is served by this one school, and if we had lost that, I can't even imagine. So 3 years after the fire, we were about at 30% rebuild, 40% higher to build a house up the McKenzie. We're rural and unincorporated, which puts a whole nother layer in rebuilding challenges. We have no mayor, no city council. You know, the county we're kind of ran by the county, right? So that was another piece in setting up a community land trust that I'll talk about more around giving a community that's rural and unincorporated, empowering them to be able to make some decisions. And there's a lot of power in being able to buy land. So I'll talk more about that. So the McKenzie School pre-fire had about 225 students. And after the fire, as low as about 140, 150 students, and now is back up to about 180. And just thinking and stepping back to the fact that we're only at 30% rebuild, and it's 45 minutes to drive from Springfield to Eugene, maybe an hour from Eugene to Blue River, where the school is. That's a long drive for folks that are still very committed to their community. And so I think that says a lot about this community. So the McKenzie River is still beautiful. You know, that it is a beautiful river. Tourism is a piece of our economy. And nobody would have expected the fact that, that property values actually increased significantly. Property values increased significantly, as well as rebuilding 40% higher, as I mentioned. And, you know, here we are. We never thought we would be in a situation where it would cost more to live there than it did before the fire. It's interesting how some of the people who have decided to move on, and when their properties are sold, and how it's listed where it's a clear view of the river because there's no trees, full sun lot because there's no trees, and come and build your dream home. And that's what people can do now. And we're finding there's a lot of second homes coming in. So we are slowly losing the community. So I had the opportunity to go with my husband, all full transparency, Devin Thompson's the ED with the McKenzie Valley Long-Term Recovery Group, to go to Wenatchee, Washington. They had experienced 3 fires, to tour their fire community and their recovery. That's how we first heard about the Mattel Housing Trust, an affordable way for the community to buy land and build homes to help meet whatever that specific community's needs are. And so what is a community land trust? Community land trusts are nonprofit, community-based organizations designed to ensure community stewardship of land. Land trusts can be used in a variety of ways. Like I think I mentioned, I worked for a conservation land trust for 14 years on the McKenzie, and I am new to affordable housing. There's a lot to learn, but this is another way we can leverage the land trust model for the overall community benefit. We also have a interest, and part of our mission is helping with the local economy. Potentially, we could buy a commercial lot and build a business, maybe apartments up on top, and then make sure and offer that commercial space at an affordable rate to a local mom and pop business. Because this is what we're not seeing coming back in Blue River and beyond, is all those, there was 13 commercial lots, and 0 have come back in 3 years, because that is one of the major gaps we've learning in recovery, is there's no assistance for private mom and pop businesses, local businesses. You know, you think back to COVID, how there was some assistance pretty quickly for businesses, especially local businesses. It's like, there is not that for disaster recovery. So that is a very big gap, especially for small communities. So our organization, this is our board. We have our 12 board members, 8 graduated from the McKenzie School. So we are very, I feel really good about the diversity of our board of how this is a very local decision-making body, many of them multi-generational. And I think that is key to, having the success of a community-driven land trust, is that it's people that live there that are making the decisions. So I'm excited to share that about a month ago, we just bought our first parcel. We bought 2 acres in Blue River. We will be building 6 affordable homes in 2024. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot. That's very exciting. It's a great way to kind of kick off our organization, who we are, share with the community what we're doing, and then also, demonstrating to other communities that this is possible. And so we have an amazing partnership because, again, we're a new organization with a great amount of experience, but none of us are in affordable housing. We are thankful for Dev Northwest. I've got Emily Wyman, the executive director for Dev Northwest over there, who is they're our development partner. They will be building our 6 homes. And they also work with us on the grant funding. Huge, it's all about partnerships, right? I mean, we can't do it alone. It's like, okay, if this isn't our expertise or we don't know, what direction to go, we just need to know who to call. And we feel confident about that and are so grateful for Dev Northwest stepping up to help us. Quickly, I wanted to realize I don't want to be too long on my time, but I'm wanting to showcase there is some rebuilding happening in Blue River. It's very exciting. Progress is happening. We've got the Francis O'Brien Memorial Library groundbreaking just happened last week, as well as the McKenzie Wellness Clinic. Groundbreaking was a few weeks ago, and the McKenzie Eagle Child Care Center opened up earlier this year, which is a huge success. But I also want to step back and call out the fact that these are all nonprofits. They're all nonprofits, so they were able to tap into grant funding, recovery dollars, and other grant funding to fund their projects. And so that is so important. These are key services to the community. But again, this is why we're seeing these structures come up first. And as we're seeing these beautiful new buildings being built in 2024, part of the concern is that's when a lot of the developers are coming in potentially, and that really could buy a good portion of the community. The community members are getting letters almost weekly from developers on both commercial and residential lots. And so that was one reason why we pushed really hard to get our organization stood up so we could be prepared. And we talked about business and being nimble. We are raising money for both a housing program as well as an economic development, that business piece program, and then operations. People, when they decide to sell a lot, they need to move on with their lives. They're not going to wait 6 months for us to get grant funding, which is how our Rose Street project, the 6 houses that we're building, we waited 6 months to get those grant dollars. Most people are not going to do that. We need to have a bucket of money that we can tap into when we see something that's going to be the right fit for our organization. And then just wanting to thank a lot of our partners. We hosted a tour a few weeks ago of all the decision makers at every level, from the state, from the county, partners, funders, and on the ground, because we're all on Zoom. We're making decisions from faraway places, and it's an opportunity it was a community led where people got to share their projects, share the challenges, share their vision, and it was we feel wonderful to see everybody in person, and looking forward to moving forward after that. And our last slide, bringing families back to Blue River. This picture, actually, I was standing there when that photograph was taken, and I was talking and planning on something else and wasn't paying attention, and realized that she was learning how to ride her bike on this day. This is one of our board members' daughters. And we talk about bringing families back, but the families are still there. They're just waiting for their community to get built around them. So thank you.
Skip the clicker. So hopefully somebody over there has got me right on. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for all of your work over the last 3 years. My name is Peter Hainley, Executive Director of CASA of Oregon. Shortly after the wildfires, I called some folks down in Southern Oregon to see what we could do. We're obviously not located there. We're in Sherwood. We developed some farm worker housing down there a long time ago. One of the projects, which was burned down in Talent. And so I had a real interest in knowing what was going on. And so I just want to appreciate all of you that did the immediate work right after the fires, and those of you that are hanging in there during the recovery. It's been a long time, and I know it takes a lot of patience. I also want to thank the U of O and Lane County for inviting me here today. I really appreciate it. I know some of our earlier presenters alluded to some of the populations that probably didn't get served as well initially, and we're hoping that in the long-term recovery, they will. So I'm going to be spending some time talking about that. As you see, I'm talking about equity and disaster recovery. And if we're not serving all of our community, then we're missing an opportunity. And so while the title of this session is Survivor to Thriving, so many of our folks are still in survivor mode. And so, we need to figure out how we're going to get that money out, how we're going to get these projects going. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about CASA so you can get some context of how we work, and then get to the projects that we've been working on down there. Next slide, please. So many of you probably reached out to friends, folks down after fires in Paradise or Camp to kind of get an idea. I did the same thing, called some of the affordable housing folks that I know that were trying to do some rebuilding. And, they gave me some really good input. It's, how can you track the folks who are there so they don't just disappear and don't come back to the community. So try to spend some time really understanding who was impacted. So that was kind of our first job, was to try and figure out really from our perspective and the populations that we typically serve, who was impacted. This is just a little bit about CASA, about our mission and our vision and values. Next slide. In our 35 years in this business, we've had a real focus on farm worker housing. In the last 15 years, we've had a focus on manufactured housing park conversions to resident ownership, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So these two main pieces that we work with intersected in that disaster down in Southern Oregon, because we know that a lot of the folks that lived in those mobile home parks were Latinx. They were farm workers. They were, working in lower wage jobs, and really weren't in many cases going to be able to access many of the resources. Now, the state really, in their wisdom, in the legislature, made the effort to get the funds out. That's low barrier. So a lot of those folks were able to access that. But even still, we know there's a lot of folks that are still living in RVs in temporary situations. Next slide. So I was last week. I was in DC at a rural housing conference, and it's a lot of HUD folks. It's a lot of USDA rural development, because USD rural development has a number of rural housing programs. And we were doing a presentation on our wildfire recovery work in Southern Oregon, and the questions kept coming. HUD needs to move faster. In my 31 years of doing this, I don't think we're going to see the federal government ever moving at a fast speed. I know it's funny, but it's the reality. I mean, it's just, I've slowed way down to accommodate that. So the question is, how do we set up a system to accommodate the federal government? And I think the state of Oregon, I know there's a lot of folks there's a lot of criticisms that we could lodge against those folks not getting the money out fast enough. But they're doing the best they could, really, in a pandemic. So I want to give props to OHCS, and you'll see why in a little bit. But first, I put this up here because the conference was sponsored by Housing Assistance Council, and this is their quarterly magazine, and they were doing a study I mean, we were doing a study on farm worker housing at the time of the wildfires. And so we were already working with PSU, Dr. Jennifer Martinez. We were working with Oregon State University and Professor Ron Mize, and then with your very own University of Oregon, Dr. Lynn Steffen. And we were working with some of the organizations down in Southern Oregon. And so we already had some sort of relationship with some of those folks because of this work that we were doing. And I bring this up because I think it's really important that, you know, we tap in to the research capabilities of these folks. And you'll see another research project coming up. But I wanted to put this one out there because this really helped us establish kind of some cred with the community, even though, you know, we had developed some projects already down in Southern Oregon with the Housing Authority many years previously. Next slide, please. So I don't need to tell you what happened in Southern Oregon. This has been gone over, so we can skip to the next slide. So what we first did, besides raising some money, and we sought money from foundations and corporations. And what we wanted to do was make sure that it was a locally driven effort, whatever it was going to be, that it was not going to be the outside developer coming in. Even though, as I said, we had some cred in the community, we didn't have enough cred to go have the conversations with this traumatized population. And so we helped raise some money, we helped facilitate some conversations in the community. And out of that came Coalición Fortaleza. And this group has really focused on community organizing. It's focused on, you know, trying to manage expectations in these really difficult times, a very difficult thing. And because we know how severely impacted the Latinx population was down in Southern Oregon. And we know that, next slide, because we did a study on it. And the study was focused on the Latinx population, and it was, you know, it wasn't to determine what happened to this one park or this one neighborhood. We surveyed 150 people from Medford. I think there were a few in Ashland, but mostly Talent and in Phoenix, and mostly had lived in manufactured housing. There were, as you can see the numbers there, you know, a lot of these folks have lived in the community for a long time, multi-generation. I mean, it says 10 plus here. I didn't go back and look, but there's a lot of people that have lived there 20 years plus. And so how do we bring them back? This study was privately funded as well by foundations and corporate interests. So, you know, I guess if there's a lesson to be learned, how can we get the government, the state government, because they can move a lot faster. How can we get them to start doing some of this work early on so you don't have to go out? Because you can, I mean, certainly everybody knows that when you have a disaster, people are giving money. In some cases, that money is flooding in. And sometimes that creates problems because people don't know what to do with it. And I think, you know, we were very clear what we wanted to do with it. We wanted to make sure that it stayed in the community, that it helped finance this study, and it helped this new organization that was starting up. So next slide, please. So I just wanted to share just a couple of the statistics here. As I said, you know, we were really focusing on the Latinx population, but 65% of those folks were homeowners. And so, you know, how do we maintain that? How do we keep them as homeowners? Because they shouldn't have to go to a rental. I mean, if they were homeowners before, but can they access the programs that, you know, are currently be offered or to be offered? I hope so. I hope some of the CDBG-DR money will be accessible to these folks. And I also know that some of them are going to fall through the cracks. And I think we just need to acknowledge that and figure out, well, how are we going to do something for them? So, you know, you can see the numbers there. You know, 57% of these folks were agricultural workers, 46 were in the food service sector. Next slide. I should say that study also, it was unique in that I was trying to look at the impacts of community beyond the typical questions of getting demographics. It was trying to get to, what was going on in these communities, because people were taking care of each other. They were taking care of kids, they were running businesses, they were working together. I mean, there was a whole different thing going on in some of those mobile home parks or manufactured home communities. And I think any of you that lived in Talent and went through Talent Mobile Estates, you saw it was a thriving community. Next slide. Oops, go back one to community engagement. I'm sorry. So I put this up here because really, if we're ever going to develop in a way that is community driven, then we've got to be able to engage the community. And I would say that government typically doesn't do a very good job of this. I mean, you could say, no offense to any elected officials here who listen to your communities, but I'm talking about the community that I'm trying to serve here. They don't have a way to enter into the system. And so how do you get them into the system? How do you get them to understand, that their voice is valuable? And so we went through a number of community engagement sessions to, help them imagine what redeveloping some of the spaces in Southern Oregon would look like. And so once again, this was, for the most part, this was money that was privately raised. I have to say something really good came out of this, though. We were able to get the state government, or Oregon Housing Community Services, to front us some money and put a specific line item in there for community engagement, which I'd never seen before. I mean, this is great. I'd like to see that happen on all of their projects so that we know that they truly are meeting their racial justice goals that they've stated in their plans. So, there's a lot of good stuff that comes out of this, but there's also that the whole time you got to be managing expectations, because while I say state government goes faster than the feds, they still go pretty slow. And, sometimes it's, I mean, you get $1 billion in a biennium to do housing, you got to staff up. That's a huge, huge job to get all of those people in the right places doing that work. And so, I want to give kudos to OHCS, because even though it's hard getting that money out, they are getting it out. And we'll see how they're getting it out in the next slide. So this is really hard to see, but on the left is the overlay of how Talent Mobile Estates will be rebuilt. This is 87 units, and it's going to be a cooperatively, it's going to be a resident-owned cooperative. So throughout the years, we've been developing resident-owned co-ops, and the residents basically purchase the land. So we're holding the land for them now. They purchase the land, and then they form this co-op, and they basically lease spaces back to themselves. And so we'll be working with them to develop that. On the right is a 34-unit project that is in Medford specifically for farm workers. So this will be a project that will be very affordable for farm workers, that have lost housing and haven't been able to find anything. Next slide. And I wanted to show this because it's funny. They said, "Hey, you guys are doing innovative stuff, right?" And it's like, we're trying. These are a couple units. The legislature provided some money to Hacienda in the Port of Portland to build mass timber, using mass timber to build some units. So we took delivery on a couple for Talent Mobile Estates. So these are, one's a 1-bedroom, the other's a 2-bedroom that we held a lottery. And I'm not sure if the folks have moved in, but they are nearly moving in. And I just found out today that we're ready to go to production with our first manufactured housing unit that's going to be coming. Well, we'll have to walk through it first, but after we accept it, then production's on, as long as the DOJ gets our agreement to us really soon. So anybody knows anybody at the DOJ? Give them a call. So That's all I got. Next slide is my contact information, and thank you so much for listening today.
Thank you, Peter and Brandi. I want to start off. So you all are doing really interesting, innovative things to help bring affordable housing back to these communities. You're implementing solutions like community land trust, resident-owned communities, and using mass timber construction like we just saw. These are things we talk about in the abstract a lot, but actually doing it on the ground is really challenging. So I wanted to sort of prime the conversation with what are some of the key barriers that you faced to implementing these innovative solutions?
Well, I think I touched on some of them in the talk and just kind of wanting to talk about that nimbleness again. And oh, I forgot to call out, I had 2 shovels in my presentation. Did you notice that? 2. And Katie's not here. I saw she left early. Yeah, it's that nimbleness of being able to buy land quickly. And, people again aren't in a place for us to ask them to be patient so they can move on with their lives. So whether it's a housing or something creative, I mean, another possibility, a vision that we have for downtown Blue River is there's this incredible sculpture of a phoenix that was built out of metal from people's homes and cars. And it's on private property because, it was this incredible gift to the community soon after the fire. We'd love to buy that parcel. We'd love to make it into a little pocket park and put a public bathroom and an EV charging station and pull folks off the highway into town for, to go to Melanie's store. So I told our board at the last board meeting, I said, I don't even think we fully know what this organization is going to be able to do for our community in recovery. So I'll stop there.
Well, I know Pam is not going to be happy I'm calling her out, but we couldn't have put those mass casita units on there if she hadn't led the charge on being able to place modular units within a mobile home park, because before you could only place manufactured housing. That might sound like a simple thing, but it's not, because we need to be looking at whatever tools we've got to construct units more affordably than we have. The legislature, in their wisdom, passed $20 million to incentivize some modular construction. That's going to be hitting the streets here. At least the RFP will be hitting the streets here probably in the next month or so. If somebody from OHCS is that about right? No? Okay. Well, it's coming soon. So that's some big money that, if there's somebody out there that's looking to set up a production line, or somebody that's got a great idea, I think that's the kind of stuff that we need to see.
Thank you. I want to open it up for questions. I have a few more, but I want to let the audience ask questions of you all.
Can you talk about how community engagement informed the outcomes of the projects you're working on and how it's maybe shifted your organization's kind of mission?
That's a great question. We've, in our farm worker housing, we've always engaged the community in some way or fashion, but this one was a lot more deliberate. So I think we go into every project now looking a lot differently how we will engage the community. We're going to be pushing, the State Housing Finance Agency to continue to do community engagement, to fund it, not just upfront, but also it should be a line item. I mean, you're required to provide services, but there's nothing specifically that says how you would engage other folks in the community. And we all know if you work in services, there's not a lot of money. I'm really excited about, I think it's Senate Bill 606, that is a task force to modernize grant making in the state, because I think we should be looking more to, funding enterprises rather than projects. There's plenty of organizations that are out there that can do this. They don't need to have, there are so many people underwriting every one of these projects. We've got tax credit investors, we've got bankers, we've got the state, and it's like, is this really necessary? I don't think so. I think if there was enterprise funding, we're part of NeighborWorks America. Every 3 years, they come out and assess us. Emily from Dev Northwest is as well. She can attest, they do a very thorough vetting of us. And I think the state could do something similar. You know, we've got a lot of very good developers, community developers. So that's what I would like to see before I retire, is some investment. And it's not just for housing organizations. I think it should be like the idea that you're doing a really good job and you have to compete, you know, with your fellow community members for these pots of money. It's just, you know, it's Hunger Games. It's rough. Did that answer your question? Not really.
Hi, I just, Dina Ferris with Sanium Canyon again, and you kind of touched on what I'm sitting here thinking as the day comes to a close, and we're a room filled of local and state, some federal agencies, lots of nonprofits. I don't know where private industry is today and what role we see them playing. When I see the mass timber casitas that were done in partnership with Hacienda and the excitement, and I think about land trust purchasing land to reinvest in a community for commercial development. And I would just pose the question as the day comes to a close, you know, what efforts are we making as policymakers and community-based organizations to really be thoughtfully and eagerly engaging our private industry and not hitting them up for donations, but actually bringing them in to be part of the enterprise solution and to leverage their ability and their connectivity as large employers in these areas that have been impacted. So I didn't know if you wanted to touch on what that looked like to bring those casitas with Hacienda, if you could give some insight on that, or what role maybe you're seeing Brandi for different businesses in your area to come in, and after, like, what's your exit strategy, right? As the land trust, like, do you always want to hold these, or do you want to see that those be turned over to folks that could be self-sustaining in their own communities? So it's not really a question, more of a comment for both of you, but.
Oh, all very good questions. And you got all sorts of things stirring in my mind. I have to pick and choose. You know, that's the wonderful thing about the land trust model, is you can flex it based on your community needs. And, you know, I'm going to bring up Dev Northwest again. For those of you that either live in the area or have been to the public house in Springfield, that's an old historic church that Dev Northwest, when they were Nedco, bought, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, made it into an incubator restaurants and tap house and all these things. And it ended up, once it got successful and going, sold it to a private entity, private owner. So we could do that. Or we could continue to own that space because we have rentals up on top, and we make sure that there's always affordable retail or affordable commercial, or make sure that coffee shop, you know, how important it is to have a coffee shop where people gather, or that little restaurant or the art gallery, right? I mean, you need those core things to make a community. So it's a good question. We've kind of thought about different options, and we'll just kind of see what happens as we're moving forward.
So as far as Hacienda and the Port of Portland, I mean, we just were receiving the unit. So I wasn't very much involved in, other than supporting their ask to the legislature. So I can't really speak to that. You know, in general, I think, you know, engaging businesses is obviously somewhere where we need to go. I mean, it's all of our destinies together. You know, that sounds kind of cliche, sorry. You know, I think of maybe this $20 million that's going to go out. I'm imagining there's going to be private businesses that are already going. And the state, in their wisdom, is going to require that they meet certain goals for racial equity, for minority and women business owned. So there's going to be, you know, some strings attached, and I think, you know, when I look at how the state also, you there's not enough nonprofit developers to spend $1 billion in housing, right? So there's a lot of for-profit developers, and there's a lot of for-profit developers that are partnering with nonprofits. And my question to the state, I'm going off topic a little bit here, but bear with me. For me, it's like, okay, so what does that relationship look like with that community group that you're basically utilizing to meet these goals? Are they a full owner in this? Are they just providing services? I mean, there's a whole range of signing an MOU to actually owning, operating, and be able to make decisions. And so, and this is one thing that the state has not yet, I mean, they're working on it, but they have not yet come down on what that relationship should look like. So I think, when you start looking at where the gatekeepers are and the state starts asking you to make sure you're serving those people in the community that aren't getting served, and they have a good way to measure it on the front end and measure it on the back end, and you all can see how your tax dollars are getting spent, then I think we're gonna be getting someplace good. So once again, I'm not sure I'm answering these questions very well, but that's kind of how I see the world that I live in, how we need to be engaging private industry.
Shuri Sidoriak from Ashland Wildfire Risk Assessor. I've heard repeatedly, and I saw it for myself in your last slide, that the landscaping conditions, what people call defensible space, were dropped as an expectation for these new home units. I also heard that the building codes were rolled back so that people could simply be housed. And what bothers me about this is, especially now, 3 years into it, this is going to happen again. And we're setting people up in these communities to burn again. That last slide with the CASA mesita in it is surrounded by bark mulch. And in California, they're actually going to try to pass a law in the next year, or they've already done it, that basically will force people, even with pre-existing vegetation, to remove it. So you're going to be increasing the cost in the future, if this moves up to Oregon, of re-landscaping properties because they are flammable. And I was wondering what thought processes you went through in this alternative housing situation to think about the future so that it doesn't happen again. We keep talking about pre-covery or something like this. I'm talking about disaster avoidance.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I totally hear you on, where is the resiliency being incorporated into this? And certainly that is one of the keys, as we've been talking with our architect, as he's working with the landscape architects to make sure that is not a final plan. So I just want to say that. And as far as the bark chips, I hear you. I hear you loud and clear. So I think as we're going forward, obviously we have certain requirements that the state will put on us, but as far as resiliency, there's no reason why we shouldn't be making sure that that's incorporated. So, and I wasn't supposed to be here to talk today. So my housing director may be able to tell you that don't worry about it. The trees that they're putting in there, the landscaping, we're going to be owning it for a couple of years. So you can be sure we're going to be keeping things clear from the sides of the houses. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Now I've got something to tell Rose when she gets back from vacation.
Well, thank you for asking that question as well, because I realize that is a big piece that I did not add to my presentation that I intended to, is our 6 homes that we are building. Part of the goal is building fire-wise homes. We want to be an example for the community of how to rebuild with resiliency. So we know that's going to cost more. Emily and I were talking about that with her contractor. It's like, okay, will you let me know how much more it's going to cost and I'll go fundraise. Let's figure this out. This is important because you're right. Certain communities but every community is under threat of fire. And that if we can make that additional investment now when we're rebuilding homes and rebuilding communities, that is key. right? It's key to that resiliency piece. So, and then we haven't even dove much into the community hardening. I appreciate you bringing that up this morning, because that's something else I think about a lot, especially coming from the conservation land trust side and, watershed health and landscape, and seeing what we learned with the Holiday Farm fire, what forests were more resilient to fire and which are not. And so how can we kind of surround our communities, especially these rural communities, in more resilient landscapes?
Hi, I'm Tessa with the Jackson County Community Long-Term Recovery Group. Thank you both so much for this work, and thank you, Peter, for all your work with Talent Mobile Estates. We also have the New Spirit Village 3D printed concrete homes project in Medford, and we saw as a community that there were challenges with zoning and building codes. And I'm wondering if either of you have advice for communities that want to innovate on how to navigate pre-existing standards.
Well, I think, first of all, understanding the code really well, or hanging out with people that understand the code really well, and being there for public comment time to make sure that the elected officials know, because they're reviewing their code fairly regularly, and if it's something that the state is mandated, but it's usually something local that needs to be worked through. So I'm a fan of going to public comment and talking about boring code ordinance rewrites, because that's where you're seeing some opportunities to make some changes in the community. I think with a lot of the different housing types that are being talked about and actually worked on. I mean, yeah, you've got New Spirit. I've seen some. Now I'm drawing a blank, but it's metal. What type of metal housing? So it's something that some folks are experimenting with. That are obviously non-flammable. There's these different building types that are going to run up into code issues. So I think it's incumbent upon some agency, and I'm pretty sure they're paying attention to this stuff as this new stuff is coming up. So once again, an unsatisfactory answer perhaps, but best I can do.
Emily, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, sure, if I'm given the opportunity, I would.
So microphone. Microphone's right next to you, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would just add, in Lane County, for example, Blue River, as Brandi mentioned, is not its own city. It's not incorporated. So it's reliant on county zones that are largely set up for very rural communities. So there are a lot of lots in Blue River that technically have to have 2 acres before you can put a home on them. And there's no imagination in our code for the type of nodal redevelopment that is going to be needed for the footprint of a town that was created in the 40s and doesn't fit into our zoning anymore. And I think that's a really important thing to tackle as we think about resilience as a state, because most of these fires are going to be in rural communities. We know that, and we can plan for that in advance. So there's a reason that we can only put 6 homes on 2 acres. I wish we could have put more. They're looking at another 1/4 acre lot that right now could only take 1 home. And in the midst of a housing crisis, in the midst of recovery, that makes no sense. So I would love to get creative heads around the table to look at how we create the zoning that we need to actually enable the redevelopment that these communities want.
Thank you so much. This was a great discussion. Thank you to our panel for that, and a great end to the comments. Emily, thank you. So folks, we're